Hi, I'm Rick with All-Fill Labeling, and today we're going to go over one of the standard alarm features on our labeler. This feature is the feed error. The feed error is exactly as the name implies. It's an error in the feeding of the label. In the most basic terms, our labeling head is simply a stepping motor connected to a product sensor and the label sensor. The product sensor triggers a label to feed, while the label sensor triggers a label to stop. So, if you tell the label to feed, or the labeling head to feed 5 inches of material, and the stepping motor turns on and does not feed the 5 inches of material, you're going to get the feed error. The most common reason for that is the label sensor itself. If the label sensor is not set up to see the gap in between the labels, this most often happens when a customer changes label material. Not all the time, but there are times when you change label material that you need to reset the sensitivity of the label sensor. And this is a simple 4-step process. You simply put the liner only, that's the part of the label without the label on it. You put the liner only in the label sensor. You press both the plus and minus buttons at the same time to put it in the teach mode. Then you put the label back on the liner, put it in the sensor, and press the minus button. You've now taught the label sensor the low threshold of the liner and the high threshold of the label on the liner. That will then make sure that the label sensor is seeing the gap. The second most common reason for the feed error alarm is in the settings itself. If we look over here and we go into our setup mode, we have setup for the labeling system and setup for the labeler itself. If we go to the labeler itself, we can see for this application, we're set to 15 inches. What that means is that when the product sensor is triggered, it's going to turn on the stepping motor, which then through gears and pulleys will turn the drive roller. If the stepping motor turns to dispense 15 inches of material and the label sensor is not triggered, this will give you your feed error. Let me go through that again. The feed error happens if whatever this number is set to, in this case it's set to 15 inches, if the stepping motor is turned on and it starts to dispense labels, and if in the counting the pulses of the stepping motor turns what would normally feed 15 inches of material and the label sensor has not been triggered, the PLC that controls the labeler knows there is a feed error. So, as I mentioned earlier, in its simplest forms, you have the stepping motor that's turned on by the label sensor, and it's turned on by the product sensor, and it's turned off by the label sensor. Most commonly is when a customer changes to a different label material. The label sensor then has to be retaught. As we went over, it's a simple 4-step process. The second most common is if the customer has set the feed error too small. So in other words, if you're running a 5-inch long label, which in this case we're running a 4 3/4 inch long label, and I was to set this number, let me go back here. I'm going to start the labeling system. Now I'm going to go into my setup. I'm going to go into my labeler settings. I'm going to change this number to 2. That means when I tell the labeler to feed, if it doesn't get a trigger from the label sensor within 2 inches, it's going to go into alarm. So what just happened here is we had our red indicator light. We have our alarm light here letting us know that it was a feed error. It felt that there was a missing label because it didn't get the trigger in time. Now, what the normal sequence of events is, when an alarm happens, we trigger the indicator light, we trigger a message on the screen, we stop the spacing wheel, then from the same control panel here, we can adjust the amount of time from when the spacing wheel stops to when the labeler stops. So, most common cause of feed error is misadjustment to the label sensor. Second most common cause is that the feed error is set too small for that label. Now I'm back to 15. Now I started the system back up. I can dispense a label and I'm running again. The third cause of a feed error would be a mechanical problem. That would mean that the motor is energized, it's turned on, it's told to feed a given distance, it moves, but it doesn't move the label material. Quite often, the drive roller has come loose, or on the underside, you can see that there are drive belts. We have the drive pulley from the motor that goes to another pulley via a belt to the drive roller, and a second belt and pulley assembly to the rewind. If any of those pulleys or belts have become loose, they will not turn the drive roller if the drive roller itself has come loose. So to recap, we have just reviewed the feed error alarm on our labelers. We have reviewed the three most common causes, which are the label sensor not set up correctly, or the limit amount in the control panel not set up, or a mechanical issue. And we've gone over the ways to resolve those. You would simply reteach the label sensor. You would simply set the number within the control panel to a proper amount, or you would then go through and look for a mechanical issue such as a loose drive roller or a loose drive belt. I thank you for your time.